Jake Phillips had everything most people could only dream of: opulent mansions, a fleet of luxury cars, and a thriving business empire. Yet, amidst all this splendor, he was a man haunted by a void he couldn't fill. His days were occupied with meetings and high-stakes deals, but his nights were empty, filled with the deafening silence of solitude. Despite the adulation of employees and business associates, Jake knew these relationships were superficial, tethered to his wealth and power rather than genuine connection. He often found himself questioning the choices that had brought him to this point, wondering why, despite having everything, he felt like he had nothing. One dreary afternoon, Jake visited his childhood town, seeking solace in the familiar streets he hadn't walked in years. The sight of the small, modest homes and the laughter of children playing in the yards brought back memories of simpler, happier times with his late parents. Yet, even this nostalgia carried an ache. As he drove through the old neighborhood, a deep yearning for something more tangible, a life with meaning and purpose, began to grow within him. Jake couldn't have known that this visit would set the stage for a life-altering encounter. While driving through a more impoverished section of town, Jake's attention was caught by the sound of children laughing. He slowed down his car and saw 4 young kids playing a game of tag on the street corner. Their energy was infectious, and their joy seemed untouched by the harsh realities of life. But what truly struck Jake was their appearance. The resemblance to him was uncanny. Something in their bright eyes and the curve of their smiles mirrored his own childhood photographs. It was as if fate had placed these children in his path. Jake pulled his car to the curb, unable to resist watching them a little longer. A surge of emotions swept through him, a mix of curiosity and an unexplainable connection. He had never seen these kids before, yet there was something deeply familiar about them. When one of the children, a boy with tousled dark hair, glanced in his direction and smiled, Jake felt his heart skip a beat. Unable to shake the feeling, he decided to follow them discreetly, hoping to uncover more about who they were and why they felt so significant to him. Jake's quiet pursuit led him to a modest apartment building on the edge of town. He watched as the children scampered up the stairs and disappeared inside, their laughter echoing in the hallway. Moments later, a woman stepped out onto the balcony. She was young, her face marked by exhaustion but illuminated with an inner strength. She called out to the children, her voice filled with both authority and warmth. This, Jake realized, was their mother. Something about her demeanor drew him in. She exuded resilience despite her obvious struggles. Curiosity got the better of him, and Jake approached her, introducing himself under the pretense of admiring the neighborhood. The woman introduced herself as Agnes, a single mother originally from a small village abroad. Life in the city had been tough on her, but she spoke with pride about her children and her determination to provide them with a better future. Jake listened intently, captivated by her honesty and grace. He couldn't help but feel admiration for this woman who seemed to embody the strength and resilience he had always lacked in his own life. Agnes was initially cautious around Jake, unsure of his intentions. A wealthy stranger showing interest in her children felt odd, even suspicious. But Jake's genuine demeanor slowly broke down her defenses. He offered to help in small, unobtrusive ways, such as bringing groceries or helping fix a broken faucet in her apartment. Agnes, though independent to a fault, reluctantly accepted his gestures, recognizing that he meant well. As their conversations deepened, Jake learned about her life as an immigrant and the challenges she faced raising quadruplets on her own. Jake marveled at Agnes' strength and the love she poured into her children despite their dire circumstances. Her stories of juggling multiple jobs while still finding time to nurture her kids moved him deeply. She revealed that their father had disappeared shortly after learning about the pregnancy, leaving her to navigate parenthood alone. Jake's heart ached for her and the children. For the first time in years, he felt compelled to step out of his own bubble of loneliness and offer something meaningful to someone else. As Jake spent more time with Agnes and her children, an unspoken bond began to form. He found himself drawn not just to her strength but also to the warmth and light her family exuded. The children, though shy at first, started to warm up to him. Emily, the eldest, asked him endless questions about his car and career, while Noah and Liam tried to impress him with their drawings. Sophie, the youngest, simply held his hand, her trust in him growing with each visit. Yet, amidst the growing connection, Jake couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion that there was more to their resemblance than coincidence. Every time he looked at them, he saw fragments of himself, expressions, mannerisms, even the way they laughed. It was uncanny, and the thought lingered in his mind, refusing to be dismissed. He didn't voice his suspicions to Agnes, not wanting to upset the fragile trust they had built, but the question of their connection loomed over him like a shadow. Spending time with the quadruplets brought a joy Jake hadn't experienced in years. He marveled at their innocence, their ability to find wonder in the smallest things. One sunny afternoon, he took them to a nearby park, watching as they raced each other across the grass. Their laughter was infectious, and for the first time in a long while, Jake found himself laughing too, a sound he barely recognized anymore. The children's energy and enthusiasm began to fill the emptiness in his heart, giving him a sense of purpose he hadn't known he needed. The children quickly came to adore Jake, seeing him as a hero who brought warmth and excitement into their lives. Emily, the boldest of the four, once asked if he could be their uncle, a request that left Jake both amused and touched. He realized that they saw him as someone who could protect and provide for them, a role he was beginning to embrace without hesitation. Their trust in him felt like a gift, one he was determined not to squander. During one of his visits, Jake met a close family friend of Agnes, an elderly woman named Rosa. She had been helping Agnes care for the children since they were born and spoke fondly of their late-night talks about dreams and challenges. However, it was something Rosa said in passing that stopped Jake in his tracks. She mentioned how Agnes had been left completely alone by the children's father, who had disappeared without a trace. The vague description sparked a flurry of questions in Jake's mind. Could there be more to this story than Agnes was letting on? Jake's suspicions about the children's resemblance to him grew stronger. He couldn't shake the possibility that their father might somehow be connected to his own past. The pieces didn't quite fit yet, but the growing puzzle was impossible to ignore. Jake decided he would have to dig deeper, even if it meant uncovering truths that might change everything. The seed of doubt planted in Jake's mind began to grow as he revisited the decisions he had made in his younger years. A particularly unsettling memory surfaced. When he was in his 20s, he had made a sperm donation to a fertility clinic during a financial rough patch. At the time, it had seemed inconsequential, even humorous, a way to earn quick money without any lasting implications. But now, faced with these 4 children who looked eerily like him, the memory took on a new weight. Jake tried to brush off the idea as coincidence, but it lingered. Could it really be possible that Agnes' children were his? The timeline seemed plausible, and the uncanny resemblance was hard to ignore. Jake wrestled with whether to bring this up with Agnes or keep his suspicions to himself. The uncertainty gnawed at him, leaving him more determined than ever to uncover the truth. Feeling overwhelmed, Jake turned to the one person who had always been his anchor, his grandmother, Evelyn. A strong-willed and wise woman, Evelyn had raised Jake after his parents' death, teaching him the values that had shaped his success. Jake confided in her about the children and his growing suspicions, hoping she might offer clarity. To his surprise, Evelyn seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. She admitted there were things about Jake's past he didn't know, but she wasn't ready to reveal them just yet. Evelyn's reluctance only fueled Jake's determination to dig deeper. He pressed her for more information, but she simply told him to follow his instincts. Sometimes, she said cryptically, the truth has a way of finding us when we're ready. Her words left Jake both frustrated and intrigued, sensing that there was more to his family history than he had ever been told. Unable to shake his suspicions, Jake decided to take matters into his own hands. He hired a private investigator, a trusted professional who had worked with him on business matters before. Jake felt conflicted about this decision, knowing it was an invasion of Agnes' privacy. But the need for answers outweighed his guilt. The investigator quickly began his work, tracking down records from the fertility clinic and any information related to Agnes' children. As Jake awaited the results, the uncertainty weighed heavily on him. He couldn't help but wonder whether discovering the truth would bring him closer to Agnes or tear them apart. Agnes had always been a fighter. When she first arrived in the country as an immigrant, she was filled with hope, convinced that the land of opportunity would give her the fresh start she desperately needed. But the reality was far from what she had imagined. She faced discrimination at nearly every turn, whether it was because of her accent, her appearance, or the color of her skin. She found herself constantly on the receiving end of prejudice. Despite her education and experience, she struggled to find a job that paid well enough to support her growing family. The challenges seemed insurmountable, but Agnes was determined not to let them break her. She worked multiple jobs, barely sleeping, in order to provide for her children. She told herself that each hardship was just a stepping stone toward a better life for them. Yet, she couldn't shake the feelings of isolation and the sense that she was alone in this fight. She had no family here, no community to lean on, just her unwavering love for her children. As she shared these stories with Jake, a deep vulnerability surfaced. Her tears were not just for the struggles, but for the dreams she had for her children's future, dreams she refused to give up on. Jake listened intently, his heart breaking for Agnes as she spoke. Her words resonated with him in a way that he had never experienced before. For all his wealth, his own life seemed so hollow in comparison to the courage she exhibited. He had everything money could buy, but he felt like he had nothing of true value. Agnes, on the other hand, had so little but still found a way to keep fighting, to keep loving. The difference between them was stark, yet he found himself admiring her strength. As she continued to talk about the emotional toll of being an immigrant and a single mother, Jake's own thoughts began to shift. He realized that he had been running from his own demons, avoiding the past he refused to confront. Perhaps, just perhaps, he needed to understand Agnes's struggles better, to see her not just as a mother to children who resembled him, but as a person with her own story of pain, resilience, and hope. The more time Jake spent with Agnes, the stronger his feelings grew. At first, it had been the uncanny resemblance of her children that drew him to her. But now, it was her spirit, her resilience, and the warmth she exuded despite all the hardships she faced. He found himself drawn to her conversations, to her quiet moments of vulnerability, and even to her laughter. Agnes had a way of making him feel seen, something he hadn't felt in years. She didn't care about his wealth or his status. She treated him like a human being, not a business transaction. As he watched her interact with her children, he saw a side of life he had long ignored, the joy of simply being present, of loving without expectations. Her unwavering devotion to her children made Jake question everything he thought he knew about success and happiness. Slowly, he began to realize that what he felt for her wasn't just admiration, it was affection, deep and real. He found himself wondering what it would be like to have a family of his own, to experience the simple joy of being a part of something that mattered more than the bottom line. Yet, despite these growing feelings, Jake was paralyzed by fear. Fear that Agnes would reject him if he revealed his suspicions about the children. He couldn't shake the thought that if she knew the truth, that he might be the father of her quadruplets, she might push him away for good. Their bond had deepened, but it was still fragile. What if his revelations shattered everything they had built? The weight of his secret felt suffocating, but Jake knew he had to face it sooner or later. The longer he waited, the more complicated his feelings became. His affection for Agnes had evolved beyond just an emotional connection. It was a longing for something deeper, something real. But with this revelation, came the inevitable fear of losing her altogether. Jake's suspicions about the children's connection to him were growing stronger by the day, but he didn't have the courage to confront Agnes with his questions. That was until he received an unexpected call from the private investigator he had hired. The investigator had dug into the fertility clinic where Jake had made a sperm donation years ago, and the results were startling. It turned out that the clinic had an international outreach program, offering services to women abroad, including immigrants like Agnes. This revelation struck Jake like a bolt of lightning. Could it be? Had he unknowingly become a father through his donation to the clinic? The realization that his biological children might be out there in the world had never seemed real until now. The dots were starting to connect, but Jake's mind raced with questions. Had Agnes known about the program? Was this some kind of fate, or was it a cruel twist of coincidence? The investigator also uncovered that the clinic had kept detailed records of sperm donors, including information about Jake's donation, which confirmed that he was indeed the biological father of the quadruplets. This newfound knowledge left Jake reeling, unsure of what to do next. Should he confront Agnes with the truth, or should he keep his distance, fearing the destruction of everything they had built? The implications were staggering. Jake had always believed that his wealth and success could fill any void in his life. Yet, here he was, faced with the undeniable truth that he had a family he never knew existed, and his desire to connect with them was far stronger than his need for riches. Still, he was conflicted. What did it mean to be a father if he had never been involved in the children's lives? How could he, a man so used to controlling everything, navigate this new world where he had no say in the past, no control over what had happened? The realization shook him to his core. And the more he thought about it, the more he understood that the children weren't just a part of his past, they were his future, whether he was ready or not. After receiving confirmation from the investigator, Jake couldn't suppress the truth any longer. The overwhelming need to confront Agnes, to understand his role in her life and her children's lives, consumed him. He drove to her apartment one evening, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and excitement. When he arrived, he found Agnes sitting on the couch, the children playing quietly in the background. He hesitated at the door, unsure of how to approach the subject. But as Agnes looked up and smiled at him, Jake knew there was no turning back. He sat down, his hands trembling slightly as he began to speak, telling her about his suspicions and the discovery he had made regarding the fertility clinic. He could barely look her in the eye as he told her that, according to the records, he might be the father of her children. Agnes's face went pale, her eyes widening with shock. She stood up abruptly, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and hurt. You think you're their father?" she demanded, her tone sharp. "You come into our lives, and now you want to claim them as yours?" She couldn't hide the pain in her voice, the deep sense of betrayal. Agnes had always been fiercely protective of her children, and the idea that a wealthy man, a stranger, could suddenly step into their lives and try to take ownership of them felt like a violation. "I don't want your money, Jake," she continued, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't need you to be their father. I've been raising them alone, and we're fine." The word stung, and Jake felt a lump form in his throat. He realized that, in his pursuit of truth, he had never fully considered how his revelation might hurt Agnes and disrupt the delicate balance of her family. "Please, just leave," she added, her voice breaking. With a heavy heart, Jake stood and left the apartment, feeling like he had just shattered everything. Jake's return to his grandmother's house was filled with turmoil. Evelyn could sense something was wrong before Jake even spoke. When he sat down beside her, his face pale and his eyes clouded with confusion, she didn't need to ask. "What happened?" she asked softly, her voice full of understanding. Jake hesitated for a moment before spilling everything, the investigator's findings, his confrontation with Agnes, and how he had been rejected. His emotions poured out, and Evelyn listened quietly, her expression softening with each passing word. When Jake finished, Evelyn sat in silence for a long time, her eyes distant as if she was deep in thought. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Jake," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "there's something I need to tell you. Your parents, they were infertile." Jake's heart stopped. "What?" he asked, his voice a mix of shock and disbelief. Evelyn took a deep breath. "They couldn't have children on their own, so they used a sperm donor. The clinic where you made your donation, they were the ones who helped us bring you into this world. Your parents, they never told you the truth." The revelation hit Jake like a thunderbolt, his mind reeling with the weight of the truth. His entire life, his identity, had been built on a lie. He wasn't just connected to Agnes and the quadruplets by fate, he was part of their story in a way he never imagined. And as the reality of this secret sank in, Jake's emotional turmoil deepened. He had always thought he had everything, but now he realized that he had been living a life devoid of the very thing he longed for most, family. As the days passed, Jake's mind was consumed by the revelations he had learned, about his past, about Agnes, and about the children. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything in his life had led him to this moment. He knew he had to speak with Agnes again. It wasn't just about claiming his role as a father or pushing to be part of their lives, it was about understanding her, her struggles, and the journey that had brought her here. He felt a deep need to connect with her on a level that went beyond the children. Jake wanted to know the woman behind the fierce protector, the immigrant mother who had fought tooth and nail for her children's future. When Jake finally approached Agnes again, he didn't lead with his knowledge of the sperm donation or the children's paternity. Instead, he gently probed into her past, seeking to understand what had made her the strong, resilient woman she was. Agnes took a deep breath, her eyes momentarily filled with memories she had long buried. She began to speak of her life before coming to the country, the hardships she faced, the heartbreak of leaving her home country in search of a better life, and the judgment she had encountered when choosing to have children on her own. Society had labeled her as unworthy, a single immigrant mother with no support. But Agnes had never been one to back down. She had come to the United States with hope, and she wasn't going to let anyone tell her that she didn't have the right to build a life for her children. She spoke of the decision to use the fertility clinic, of the loneliness that came with it, and of the dreams she carried for her children. Agnes explained how she had always known there was a possibility that her children's father was unknown, but the more she thought about Jake's presence, the more she began to see that perhaps the universe had a hand in it all along. Jake was struck by the raw honesty in her words. Her life had been filled with obstacles, and yet she had managed to carry herself with such grace and dignity. He realized how little he truly understood about the sacrifices she had made for her children. The more he learned about Agnes, the more he admired her resilience. She was not just the mother of his children, she was someone who had been through unimaginable hardships, and yet, still, she stood tall, unbroken. And in that moment, Jake knew that whatever had brought them together, be it fate, chance, or destiny, he wanted to be a part of her life, not just as a father, but as someone who could support and share in her journey. The tension between Jake and Agnes lingered like a cloud hanging over them. Though their connection had grown, the revelation of his possible paternity had caused an irreparable rift. Agnes's resistance was palpable, and while Jake understood her feelings, he couldn't deny the burning need to know the truth. It was a truth that seemed to echo in every corner of his mind. He had to know if he was truly the father of the quadruplets. This wasn't about validation or recognition, it was about understanding his role in their lives and, ultimately, in his own life. He couldn't move forward without the certainty of the truth, no matter how painful or complicated it might be. After much contemplation, Agnes finally agreed to a DNA test. It wasn't something she wanted to do, but deep down, she knew that Jake was sincere in his desire to understand. They both realized that this was the only way to put the question to rest once and for all. The test was done in silence, the weight of the moment heavy on both their shoulders. Jake watched as the children played in the corner of the room, oblivious to the tension in the air. The anticipation of the results gnawed at him, the uncertainty of the outcome making him feel more vulnerable than he ever had. For Agnes, the process was equally difficult. She had built a life without Jake, and the idea of him being in her world, tied to her children by blood, was a complicated mix of emotions. What would this mean for them? Would it change everything? Would Jake become a permanent fixture in their lives, and if so, would he truly stay, or would he once again walk away? The outcome of the test would answer all of these questions, but it was clear that the real journey, understanding what it meant to be a family, was just beginning. When the DNA test results came back, the truth was undeniable. Jake Phillips was indeed the biological father of Agnes's quadruplets. The moment he read the letter from the clinic confirming the results, his heart felt heavy, the weight of the discovery sinking in. It wasn't just the fact that he had 4 children he had never known about, but the realization that his life had been incomplete without them. There was no turning back now. The bond between him and the children was irrevocable, and he had to face the reality of his role in their lives. But while the revelation brought clarity, it also created immense tension between him and Agnes. For her, this confirmation was an emotional blow. It confirmed all the fears she had buried deep inside her heart. Jake might come into their lives and try to take over, changing everything. It confirmed that the man who had stepped into their world, offering help and guidance, might have an agenda of his own. Agnes's protective instincts flared. Her children were everything to her, and she wasn't about to let anyone, especially a man who had been absent for so long, come in and disrupt the delicate balance she had built. In the face of her anger and suspicion, Jake struggled to find his place. He had never envisioned fatherhood in this way, never imagined stepping into the lives of children who were so dear to someone else. But now, with the truth out in the open, he was left to confront the full extent of his actions, and the consequences they carried. He couldn't undo the past, but he could be present in their future, if they would allow him. As the days passed, the tension between Jake and Agnes only grew. Agnes's distrust didn't ease, and Jake began to feel the weight of his decision to pursue a relationship with her and the children. He wasn't sure how to prove to Agnes that his intentions were genuine, that he wasn't just trying to insert himself into their lives for his own benefit. The emotional roller coaster left both of them questioning everything. What did it mean to be a family? Could love truly emerge from such unexpected circumstances, or would the past forever stand in the way of their happiness? After the emotional chaos that followed the DNA test results, Jake and Agnes found themselves at a crossroads. Agnes, still reeling from the sudden upheaval, needed time and space to process the new reality. She wasn't ready to embrace Jake fully, to let him step into a role that she had never imagined for him. But Jake wasn't ready to give up either. He knew that the path to healing and understanding wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to fight for the chance to build something meaningful with her and the children. It was time for them to start over, to rebuild their relationship based on honesty and trust. Jake began spending more time with the children, not as their father, but as a friend and a consistent presence in their lives. He learned their likes and dislikes, their favorite games, and their unique personalities. Emily, the quiet one, loved to read stories, while Noah was always creating imaginary worlds. Liam had a fascination with cars, and Sophie loved to play dress-up. Jake found himself falling more deeply in love with their innocence and energy. Through them, he discovered a joy that money could never buy. He also began to understand the bond Agnes had with her children, a bond built on years of sacrifice, care, and unconditional love. In many ways, their relationship was a model for what he wanted with them, genuine, unhurried, and full of affection. Gradually, Agnes began to soften. As she watched Jake interact with the children, she saw a side of him that was different from the wealthy businessman who had first appeared in her life. He was attentive, kind, and genuinely invested in their well-being. Slowly, they started to communicate more openly, sharing their fears and hopes for the future. For the first time, Agnes allowed herself to believe that there might be room for Jake in their world, not as an outsider, but as someone who could truly contribute to their happiness. Trust was being rebuilt, piece by piece, as they both opened their hearts to one another. They weren't there yet, but they were on the path towards something real, something that neither of them had anticipated but both desperately needed. As time passed, the walls between Jake and Agnes began to break down, one conversation at a time. Agnes had seen Jake's true commitment to the children, and she was starting to let him into their lives in small but meaningful ways. It wasn't easy, there were still moments of doubt, and both of them were learning to navigate this new dynamic. But slowly, they were learning to trust one another. Jake became more involved in the children's daily routines, helping with their schoolwork, taking them to the park, and even preparing meals with Agnes. In these simple moments, he found a kind of joy he had never experienced before. For the first time, he wasn't focused on meetings, investments, or acquisitions. He was focused on the happiness of these children, on being present for them, and on supporting Agnes in any way he could. It wasn't just about being their father anymore, it was about being a partner to Agnes, sharing in the responsibilities of raising her children and building a family together. Agnes, too, began to see Jake in a new light. Her initial resistance started to fade as she observed how genuinely he cared for her children. She had spent so long protecting them from the outside world, from men who had come and gone, that she had forgotten how to let someone in. But Jake's quiet patience, his willingness to step into their world without expectation, allowed her to see that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance at building something together. She could never replace the role she had played in the children's lives, but perhaps she didn't have to do it alone anymore. Jake wasn't just a man who had come to claim his children, he was becoming a man who wanted to share the burden of love and responsibility with her. And as they spent more time together, surrounded by the laughter of children and the warmth of newfound connection, Agnes started to believe that family, in its truest sense, wasn't about blood alone, it was about love, sacrifice, and the willingness to grow together. The foundation for something beautiful had been laid, and it was only just the beginning. Jake's life had always been dictated by deadlines, meetings, and business deals. But as he spent more time with Agnes and her children, he began to see the flaws in his former life. The wealth, the power, the constant pursuit of success, none of it had ever brought him the fulfillment he now found in the laughter of the quadruplets and the quiet companionship of Agnes. His lavish lifestyle no longer felt like a meaningful pursuit. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning the choices he had made. Was all the money worth the loneliness? Was success truly success if it came at the cost of human connection? The answer, Jake realized, was no. He needed a change. Jake made the difficult decision to scale back his business commitments, hiring a team to handle the majority of his work. The move was unprecedented for him, but it was also necessary. He wanted to be present for the children. He wanted to be there for Agnes, not just as a father or partner, but as a genuine support. His days were now filled with simple pleasures, taking the kids to school, playing games, and helping Agnes with the household chores. In the process, Jake was rediscovering a version of himself he had long buried under the weight of ambition. The man who had been obsessed with winning now found himself learning the value of losing time to his career, losing the endless chase for more, and gaining something far more valuable, love, connection, and purpose. Agnes' life had always been a delicate balance of work, motherhood, and survival. But when a crisis arose at her job, one she hadn't expected, she found herself overwhelmed. The small community center she worked for faced severe financial difficulties, and the board of directors was threatening to close it down unless they could raise a significant amount of money in a short amount of time. Agnes knew how much the center meant to the families it served, but she was struggling to keep up with the demands of the situation. Desperate, she confided in Jake, who had grown increasingly involved in her life. Jake didn't hesitate. He immediately offered his support, even though Agnes hadn't asked for it. He knew how important the center was to her, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't looking at a problem with the eyes of a businessman. He wasn't trying to find the quickest way to fix things for his own benefit, he wanted to help because he understood how deeply it mattered to Agnes. He called in favors from his network, offering financial backing to keep the center afloat. But his involvement didn't stop there. Jake worked alongside Agnes, offering emotional support and helping her organize fundraising events. For the first time, Jake wasn't just solving a problem for his own ego, he was showing Agnes that he would stand by her, no matter what. This wasn't about a business deal or an investment, it was about supporting her in a way that went beyond money. Agnes was humbled by his gesture, and for the first time, she saw Jake not as a wealthy businessman, but as a man who cared about the people in his life, especially her. Despite the closeness between Jake and Agnes, the outside world wasn't so kind. As soon as the media got wind of Jake's connection to the quadruplets, the news spread like wildfire. There were headlines speculating on everything from the nature of his relationship with Agnes to the mysterious connection between him and the children. Some called it a love story, others labeled it a scandal. The media had a field day, and for the first time in his life, Jake found himself under a microscope. But it wasn't just his life being scrutinized, it was Agnes too. Agnes was no stranger to judgment, but this was different. She had fought her entire life to keep her children safe from the harshness of the world, and now that world was poking its nose into their personal lives. She hated the attention. She didn't want her children to grow up in the spotlight. At the same time, she was angry. Angry at the world for being so quick to judge, angry at herself for getting involved with a man who had so much to lose. Jake, on the other hand, was starting to feel the weight of it all. He had spent years hiding behind his wealth, avoiding personal scrutiny, but now he was exposed in a way that made him uncomfortable. He could see the pain it was causing Agnes, and that hurt more than anything the media could say. The attention, the speculation, the rumors, they didn't matter to Jake. What mattered was Agnes, her children, and the life they were beginning to build. But navigating this public scrutiny would test their relationship in ways they hadn't expected. As the weeks went by, the quadruplets began to sense the growing tension around them. They were too young to fully understand the media's fascination with their family, but they could feel the shift in the air. Emily, the eldest, started asking more questions about Jake's role in their lives. She had noticed the subtle changes in the way he interacted with them. He was always around now, offering guidance, playing with them, and helping with their homework. Emily was beginning to understand that Jake wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was becoming part of their world in a way that was both exciting and confusing. Jake found himself at a crossroads. How did he explain to the children the complexities of their relationship? He wasn't their father in the traditional sense, but he was their biological father, and that made everything more complicated. Emily's questions were innocent, but they were also probing. "Are you staying with us, Jake? Will you be our dad?" she asked one evening as they sat together in the living room. Jake didn't have all the answers, but he knew he couldn't avoid the conversation. He gently explained to Emily that while he wasn't their father in the way they might expect, he was there for them. He wanted to be part of their lives, and he would always do his best to be there for them, no matter what. It wasn't the easiest conversation, but Jake knew it was necessary. He didn't want the children to feel confused or unsettled. He wanted them to know that he loved them, and that love was unconditional. In the midst of everything, Jake's grandmother, Evelyn, became a quiet source of strength. Having raised Jake after his parents' untimely death, Evelyn had always been his anchor. When she heard about the struggles Jake and Agnes were facing, both the public scrutiny and the emotional weight of their situation, she insisted on meeting Agnes and the children. Jake wasn't sure how to feel about it. He worried that his grandmother, with her old-school values, might not understand his new priorities. But Evelyn was adamant. She had always believed that love was the most important thing, and she wanted to see if Jake had finally realized that. When Evelyn met Agnes, she immediately recognized the strength and resilience in her. She admired how Agnes had raised the quadruplets on her own, and she could see the deep connection between Agnes and Jake. There was no judgment in Evelyn's eyes, just understanding. As for the children, Evelyn was charmed by their innocent wonder and energy. She saw in them the same spark of life that had once been in Jake when he was a child. Evelyn shared her wisdom with Jake, reminding him that family wasn't just about blood, it was about the people who were there for you when you needed them the most. She encouraged Jake to continue on this path, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Her support gave Jake the clarity he needed. He wasn't just building a life for himself anymore, he was building a family. A real, imperfect, beautiful family. As Jake spent more time with Agnes and her children, he felt an overwhelming desire to give back. He had spent his entire life accumulating wealth, but it wasn't until now that he understood what true fulfillment meant. Inspired by Agnes' strength and the sacrifices she had made as an immigrant mother, Jake decided to contribute to causes that were close to her heart. He made large donations to immigrant support programs and local community centers, including the one where Agnes worked. It wasn't just about writing a check. Jake wanted to make a real difference, to show that he believed in the mission of these programs. His donations didn't stop there. He also worked with Agnes to establish mentorship programs for young immigrants, offering them opportunities they might not otherwise have. Through these efforts, Jake found a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life. Helping others, especially those in the same situation as Agnes had been, felt like the most important thing he could do. The work was challenging, but it also brought him a deep sense of satisfaction. For the first time, Jake felt like he was using his wealth for something meaningful. And through it all, he began to understand that redemption wasn't something that came easily. It required action, sacrifice, and a willingness to change. Jake had been given a second chance at life, and he wasn't about to squander it. With time, Jake's feelings for Agnes only deepened. He had come into her life by chance, and now he couldn't imagine it without her. The connection they shared was undeniable, but he knew that asking her to take that next step was a big decision. Agnes had been through so much already, and the last thing he wanted was to pressure her. Still, as they sat together one evening, after the children had gone to bed, Jake couldn't hold back his feelings any longer. "I love you, Agnes," he said quietly, taking her hand in his. "I don't know where we're going, but I want to go there with you. I want to be there for you and the children, no matter what." Agnes looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. Jake didn't want to rush her, didn't want to make her feel like she had to make a decision right away. He simply wanted her to know that he was in this for the long haul. Jake was asking for more than just her love, he was asking for her trust, her partnership, and the chance to build a life together. Despite her feelings for Jake, Agnes wasn't sure if she could fully commit to him. The fear of losing her independence was strong. For so long, she had been solely responsible for the quadruplets, doing everything on her own. Allowing Jake into her life, into their family, meant surrendering some of that control. It wasn't just about trusting him, it was about trusting herself to let go. Agnes wrestled with the idea of giving up her sense of autonomy. She had always been the one to make decisions, to ensure that everything ran smoothly. The thought of sharing that responsibility, of possibly losing herself in a relationship, frightened her. But at the same time, she couldn't deny that she cared deeply for Jake. She had seen him evolve from a wealthy businessman to a man who truly cared about her and her children. But the fear was still there. Would she lose herself if she opened her heart to him fully? Would she lose the strength that had kept her going all these years? One evening, as the family sat together at dinner, Emily suddenly spoke up. "Jake, will you stay with us forever?" Her question was innocent, but it held a deeper longing. She had come to see Jake as a part of her life, and she wanted him there permanently. The quadruplets had begun to view Jake not just as a figure from their past, but as a present and future presence in their world. They missed him when he wasn't around, and they loved the way he made them feel safe. Agnes looked at Jake, her heart heavy. The children's wish was clear, but so was her own uncertainty. She knew that she couldn't ignore what they needed any longer. She had built a life for herself and her children, but maybe, just maybe, she could build something more with Jake. The thought terrified her, but at the same time, it gave her hope. Seeing how the children adored Jake, how much he had already become a part of their lives, made her question if she could deny this chance at love and family. Her reservations were starting to melt away. The next day, Agnes made her decision. She and Jake sat down together, and after a long conversation, they agreed to take the next step together, no longer just as co-parents, but as partners in life. Agnes understood that she didn't have to give up her independence to love Jake. She could maintain her strength and individuality while building something beautiful with him. They both had been through too much not to recognize how special their connection was. Together, they could create the family they had always longed for. As they moved forward, there was a sense of peace between them. The future was still uncertain, but the love they shared was a steady foundation on which to build. Jake had found redemption in the eyes of the children, in the heart of Agnes, and in the life they were beginning to create together. It wasn't going to be perfect. There would be challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. And for the first time in his life, Jake Phillips felt complete, not because of his wealth, but because of the love he had found in this small, unexpected family. Jake had never imagined himself as a father. His early life had been centered around business, ambition, and personal success. But when he became a part of Agnes' family, everything shifted. The first few months were filled with challenges. Jake wasn't used to the constant demands of parenting, especially with 4 children at once. There were endless questions, tantrums, homework sessions, and bedtime stories that needed to be managed. It was a far cry from the controlled, predictable environment of his business meetings and high-powered lifestyle. Yet, Jake found himself enjoying it more than he had ever expected. He embraced the role with a mix of humor and determination. There were moments of doubt, times when he felt out of his depth, like when the quadruplets would argue or when they needed help with school projects, and he had no idea where to begin. But with each passing day, he grew more confident in his ability to guide them. He wasn't just there to provide financial support, he was there to be present, to listen, and to teach. Slowly but surely, he learned what it meant to be a father, not in the traditional sense, but in his own way. The joy of watching his children grow, the pride he felt in their accomplishments, and the deep bond that began to form between them made him realize that fatherhood was about so much more than biology. It was about love, patience, and dedication. And Jake was more than ready for it. Agnes and Jake had always been driven by a sense of purpose, but now that they had found each other, they realized that they could combine their strengths to create something even bigger. Together, they decided to start a joint venture that would support underprivileged families, a cause that was close to both of their hearts. The foundation was meant to provide resources, mentorship, and financial assistance to those who were struggling, much like Agnes had when she first arrived in the country. It was their way of giving back, of using their combined talents and resources to make a difference in the lives of others. Agnes brought her knowledge of community work and her deep understanding of the struggles that families in need faced. Jake, with his business acumen and financial backing, knew how to structure the foundation and make it sustainable. Together, they formed a powerful team, one that was united not only by their love for each other but also by their shared values. As they worked together to build this venture, they realized that their collaboration was more than just about philanthropy, it was about creating a legacy. They weren't just helping families now, they were laying the foundation for a future where their children, and future generations, could continue their work and carry forward their values. It was a legacy of love, compassion, and service to others. And that felt more rewarding than anything Jake had ever achieved in business. Evelyn had always been a guiding force in Jake's life, and now that she saw the man he had become, she couldn't help but feel proud. When she had raised him after his parents' passing, she had hoped he would find happiness, but she never imagined it would come in such an unexpected form. Jake's transformation from a self-focused businessman to a devoted father and partner was nothing short of remarkable. Evelyn had watched him grow into someone who valued love, family, and connection more than anything else, and it filled her heart with joy. One afternoon, Evelyn sat with Jake in the living room, holding his hand. "I never imagined I'd see this day," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've become the man I always hoped you would be, someone who knows that family is everything. I'm so proud of you, Jake." Her words were a blessing, a confirmation of the journey he had taken, and they meant more to him than anything else. Evelyn had always been there for him, but now, with the family he had built with Agnes and the children, he felt that her blessing was complete. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about the future they had created together, a future built on love, faith, and community. Evelyn's pride in him was the final piece that made him feel like he truly belonged to something greater than himself. Even as Jake and Agnes grew closer, Agnes still struggled with the idea of fully blending their lives. She had spent so many years being self-sufficient, relying on no one but herself and her children. The thought of relinquishing some of that independence was difficult. She feared that allowing Jake too deeply into her world would mean giving up a part of herself. There were nights when she questioned if she was making the right decision, if she was ready to fully trust Jake with her heart, her children, and her future. But each time doubt crept into her mind, she found reassurance in Jake's actions. He wasn't perfect, but he had shown her, time and time again, that he was there for her and the children. His dedication to their family wasn't just a passing phase, it was real. He wasn't asking her to change who she was, he was asking her to allow him into her life, to share in the burdens and joys of raising their family. She saw the way he interacted with the children, the care he took in making them feel loved and supported, and it made her heart soften. Jake wasn't trying to control her or replace what she had built, he was trying to be a part of it. Slowly, Agnes began to realize that love wasn't about losing yourself, it was about growing together. After months of hard work, both on their foundation and in their personal lives, Jake decided it was time for a break, a chance to bond as a family and to create memories away from the pressures of daily life. He surprised Agnes and the children with a vacation to a quiet beach resort, a place where they could relax, reconnect, and simply enjoy each other's company. The trip was a turning point in their relationship. Away from the distractions of the outside world, they were able to focus on what really mattered, their love for one another and the joy of being together as a family. The children had a blast, building sandcastles, swimming in the ocean, and exploring the local markets. Jake and Agnes spent their days walking along the beach, talking about their hopes for the future and reflecting on how far they had come. It wasn't a lavish vacation, but it was perfect for them. It was a chance to breathe, to take a step back from the pressures of life, and to simply be present with each other. During one quiet evening, as they sat around a bonfire, Jake looked around at the children and Agnes, and for the first time, he felt complete. This was what he had been searching for all along, a family, a connection, a love that made everything else seem insignificant. No relationship is without its challenges, and Jake and Agnes were no exception. One evening, after a minor misunderstanding about the direction of their foundation, they found themselves at odds. Agnes felt that Jake was taking too much control over the decisions, while Jake felt that Agnes wasn't being receptive to his ideas. The argument was heated, and for a moment, both of them wondered if they were drifting apart. It was a painful realization, but it also gave them the opportunity to truly listen to each other. After a long conversation, they both realized that they had allowed their individual fears to cloud their communication. Jake had been acting out of a desire to protect and provide, but he hadn't always considered how his actions might come across. Agnes, on the other hand, had been hesitant to give up control because of her past struggles. They both had valid points, but the key was learning to compromise and trust each other. With open hearts, they worked through their differences, reaffirming their commitment to each other and their shared goals. It was a humbling experience, but it made their bond even stronger. They learned that love wasn't about perfection, it was about working through the tough times together. As their foundation continued to grow, Agnes and Jake began to see the fruits of their labor. Their work was making a real difference in the lives of underprivileged families, and their community started to take notice. People who had once been skeptical about their intentions began to offer their support. They were featured in local news, and their work inspired others to get involved in giving back to their communities. It was a moment of pride for both Jake and Agnes, but it was also a reminder of why they had started this journey in the first place, not for recognition, but to create a lasting impact. Jake found himself more fulfilled by this recognition than any business achievement he had ever received. The joy of knowing that their work was helping others, that they were building a better future for those who needed it most, was far greater than any financial success. And Agnes, who had once been alone in her struggle, now had a partner who shared her vision and commitment. Together, they had built something beautiful, a legacy of giving, of love, and of family. A few years into their relationship, Jake felt it was time to take the next step. He had already proposed once, but this time, he wanted to make it special, a moment that involved not just him and Agnes, but their entire family. He decided to propose again, but this time, he did it in front of the children. One evening, as they all sat together in the living room, Jake got down on one knee and asked Agnes to marry him once more. The children watched with wide eyes, and Emily, the eldest, giggled with excitement. Agnes, surprised and moved by the gesture, took a deep breath. It was a simple proposal, but it was filled with meaning. This time, she wasn't just saying yes to Jake, she was saying yes to their family, to their future together. The children erupted in cheers, and Jake pulled Agnes into a warm embrace. This was their moment, a moment that marked not just a new chapter in their relationship, but a new chapter in their family's story. Jake and Agnes didn't want a grand, extravagant wedding. They had been through enough in their lives to know that love wasn't about pomp and circumstance, it was about the people who mattered most. So they decided to marry in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by their closest family and friends. Evelyn, who had been there for Jake every step of the way, beamed with pride as she watched the couple exchange vows. The children, dressed in their best clothes, stood by their side, beaming with joy. The ceremony was simple, but it was filled with love. Jake and Agnes exchanged vows that reflected their journey together, vows of trust, respect, and partnership. It wasn't about the venue or the dresses or the flowers, it was about the commitment they were making to each other and to their children. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, it felt like the beginning of something truly beautiful. They had built a life from scratch, and now they were officially family. With their wedding behind them, Jake, Agnes, and the children embarked on a new chapter of their lives. There were still challenges ahead, life would never be perfect, but they knew they could face anything together. Jake had learned that love, resilience, and connection were the true sources of wealth. He had built a life that was full of meaning, a life surrounded by love and the warmth of his family. Agnes, once hesitant to trust again, had found the strength to open her heart and build a future with Jake. Together, they proved that family wasn't just about blood, it was about love, commitment, and the willingness to stand by each other through thick and thin. They had faced struggles, doubts, and obstacles, but they had always come out stronger on the other side. And now, as they looked forward to the future, they knew that the love they had for each other and their children would be the foundation of everything they did. In the end, they had created their own happily ever after, a family bound not just by circumstance, but by deep, unwavering love. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification, so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.